recording. I was supposed just to be the opening act or introducer for Dr. Klaus Eckermann, and he didn't receive an ETA, so he is stuck in Germany, or rather at Brussels, and couldn't come to be here, which is a quite sad irony, talking about a topic linking English and German literature and showing how closely connected these two literatures and cultures have been over the century. So what you get instead is a slightly improvised or very improvised extension of the introduction I meant to give, linking the topic of my first week lecture on principles of translation with the specialist lecture Klaus Eckermann was going to give about a particularly influential piece of translation, namely Christoph Martin Wieland's Shakespeare translation, which signals a turning point in the reception of English literature in Germany, and also stands at a point where translation theory is as hotly discussed as rarely before and after. So you'll get this Überleitung between Martin Luther's Sendbrief vom Dolmetschen, which I've brought in the Taylorian copy since it didn't arrive last time in time, and then the Taylorian copy of Christoph Martin Wieland's edition. I'll hold it to the camera for posterity. You can actually see it if you consult Wieland on Google Books. You'll see this identical copy on the screen, because the Taylorian cooperated on a test run with Google Books. So most of the European literature, partly really to push literature beyond the English-speaking realm. So if you look at Voltaire or Wieland or any other out of copyright German, French, Italian, Spanish author, as likely as not you see a book plate. But I'll also give a coda, a kind of Ausblick, which I'd also intended to give more over tea and coffee in the Ashmolean, and that is the relevance that the Taylorian has had for translating Shakespeare, particularly connected with one name, Ernst Stadler. I'm not sure whether you've come across him as part of your paper 8 lectures, one of the most influential German expressionist writers, who was as a Rhodes Scholar in Oxford and worked actually using this copy of Wieland's Shakespeare to prepare his own new edition of Wieland's complete works, and to prepare his Habilitationsschrift on Wieland. His doctorate he had done on Parzival manuscripts, comparing manuscript D and G. So you can see where studying German at Oxford can lead you, both to be an expressionist poet and to be an editor of Wieland, hopefully not to also what is linked with Stadler, and that is his death in one of the first battles of World War I, having to fight on the German side against some of his colleagues from Magdalen College, So he is commemorated alongside the other young men who died in the same battle on the other side. So it's a bit of a long arc we are doing from Luther to World War I. The transition is, I'm showing you this slide which I'd shown last time, how really translation studies developed in Germany very much via Bible translation, developing theories of translation with das Entry vom Dolmetschen, but also pretty much every schoolboy or schoolgirl in the early modern period would start learning to read and write with the Bible, and then would start learning languages by reading biblical Greek. So, for example, Hölderlin, Hegel, and Schelling shared a room in Göttingen in the Theologisches Stift and translated together the Greek New Testament into German before starting to write their own. And Wieland is very much still in this development of coming to modern languages via translating from classical languages. He actually learned English through French, through reading French translations of English works, which he had to teach himself by just picking the only available French text in his gymnasium from the shelf and a dictionary and just looking up word by word. So not via immersion method, but really through literary translation. So English drama comes in a big wave in the 18th century to Germany through the popularity also of folk songs. So Johann Gottfried Herder, Stimmen der Völker, collecting, trying to get back to the earliest sources, and Scottish folk songs, but also Shakespeare plays were considered much more in tune with early forms of vernacular literature than, for example, French literature, which had much more formative formation through classical literature. So learning English, accessing English literature is an attempt to access the shared Germanic roots also of German and English. But contact with Shakespeare came much earlier through multimedia forms, namely on the stage by English groups that would be traveling the continent with things like puppet theater, so a bit like Judy and Punch performances of Hamlet, if you can imagine that, relying on very little words, just occasional dialogues ad hoc translated and adapted to an audience, and having more in common these performances with medieval mystery plays or with commedia dell'arte than with drama performances as we would know it. And with the development of the German theater, so I'm not sure how much you've covered in paper 7 or paper 8 lectures, die Vertreibung des Hans Wurst, so the banning of the clown figure or the stand-up comedy and the strive for serious drama associated with figures like Lessing, they needed new place to perform. So with the professionalization, the translation need came up. The first translations of Shakespeare had been not meant really for performance, but were part of an overview of his work that included also sonnets and other works like the odes, which were adapted and very much eingedeutscht. In the sense, you see here in the title of Andreas Gryphii, Freuden- und Trauerspiele, auch Oden und Sonette, samt Peter Squens Schimpfspiel. Schimpf in the sense of fun, a funny, a comedic play. And Peter Squens is the German spelling for the clown Quince from the Midsummer Night's Dream. So this wasn't yet really suitable for performance on this reformed new stage. And so it's really something new when Christoph Martin Wieland starts translating Shakespeare, really with very little philological means of not much better than you sitting in the examination schools just with a pen and your knowledge of the language. So your knowledge of German is probably much better than that he had of English, and then have to deal with Shakespeare vocab in an edition that had been on many parts verschlimmbessert. So it was a contemporary edition of Shakespeare's works where the editor had tried to explain obscure words with very little knowledge of historical linguistics. So it's worthwhile studying paper 4, so that if you edit early modern German plays, you don't make such a mess of it as this. I've just forgotten his name, but probably better if he is forgotten, made of the play. So Wieland had to second guess many of the meanings. And interestingly enough, the translations that have stayed are particularly the comedies, because they're less dependent on the exact literal meaning and much more on being able to deliver a punchline, even to second guess the meaning from the context. So a bit like when I was just teaching paper 3, translation from early modern, really trying to get the sense of the overall text before diving down into a single vocab. And that's what Wieland had to do. And so the context in which he translated was that, as I had said, of a newly arisen interest in verlebendigen breathing new life into stale German literature through introducing the best examples of from other cultures and languages. And it's very much the idea of verdeutschen, if you remember the image of the ferryman, it's very much taking the text to the reader, and that is something that Goethe recognized, particularly in Wieland, when he was giving a speech at the funeral of Wieland, or rather not at the funeral. Goethe hated funerals. He was mortally afraid of death. Well, that's involuntary pun. So he never went to funerals, but he gave a speech later in honor of Wieland. He said, es gibt zwei Übersetzungsmaximen. Die eine verlangt, dass der Autor einer fremden Nation zu uns herübergebracht werde, dergestalt, dass wir ihn als den unsrigen ansehen können. Die andere hingegen macht an uns die Forderung, dass wir uns zu dem Fremden hinüberbegeben. So the one is bringing the author or the text to you, so to make the foreign author or the foreign text into a German text. And the other, dass wir zu dem Fremden hinüberbegeben und uns in seine Zustände meaning the characteristics of life, of culture and nature, both that we acclimatize, you could say. So take in the weather, the landscape, the character of the people, seine Sprachweise, also their diction, meaning also you don't use your own idioms, you try to create new idioms for German by literal translation. So you wouldn't translate to kill two stones. No, it's not to kill two stones. To kill two birds with one stone. The equivalent German proverb would be zwei Fliegen mit einer Klappe schlagen. That would be the idiomatic way of expressing it, but if you wanted to expand the capability of German, you would instead say zwei Vögel mit einem Stein erschlagen and coin a new. So imitate seine Sprechweise, seine Eigenheiten, even the idiosyncrasies you would imitate. Die Vorzüge von beiden sind durch musterhafte Beispiele allen gebildeten Menschen genugsam bekannt. Unser Freund, der auch hier den Mittelweg suchte, war beide zu verbinden bemüht, doch zog er als Mann von Gefühl und Geschmack in zweifelhaften Fällen die erste Maxime vor. So Wieland trying to balance enriching the German language through import, but also to make the foreign literature more easily understandable by domesticating the text. And I've already mentioned Johann Gottfried Herder as an important contemporary, Stimmen der Völker in Liedern, which collected folk songs from around the world, translated them, including Scottish and English folk songs. Then Johann Heinrich Voss, who translation of the Odyssey and Iliad were practically in every bookshelf of any middle class or academic household in Germany up to the 1920s at least. Incredibly formative in introducing hexameters as an art form into German, and suddenly everybody was writing German hexameters. He was later ridiculed because he prioritized keeping the hexameter over the literal translation, so he had to use quite often fill words. So in the line, they started to eat, he always had to introduce a lecker to make it scan. Und sie erhoben die Hände zum lecker bereiteten Mahle, which isn't in the Greek of this kind of fill words. And then the Shakespeare drama that you'll see still performed primarily on German stage as the so-called Schlegeltik. August Wilhelm Schlegel, also important theorist for translation, and Ludwig Tieck, whom you might know as a Romantic author, who also was a medievalist, the first to make the Minnesang edition of the based on the Codex Manesse available in German. What I've put on the left-hand side is a watercolor which shows the Abendgesellschaft in the Wittumspalais of the Countess Anna Amalia in Weimar, because that is the context in which most of Wieland's translations would have been tested first. I think the oral element of literature is quite often undervalued for the early modern period. It's well known for that medieval literature is performance literature in the first place, but most of early modern text right into the early 20th century, if you think of something like the Georgekreis, would have first been tested in draft form in a circle or a bit like the reading groups that have become fashionable again in the last 20 years, but certainly not primarily a lyric for a home use, but for a gesellige Runde, the Gesellschaft. Now to look at Wieland also practiced what he was kind of preaching, and that he not just translated but also showed how a new modern German literature inspired by these translations could look like. So he wrote a long poem called Oberon in 14 Gesängen, which he introduces in his own voice. Noch einmal sattelt mir den Hieroglyphen ihr Musen zum Ritt ins alte romantische Land. Wie lieblich um meinen entfesselten Busen der holde Wahnsinn spielt. Wer schlang das magische Band um meine Stirne? So he takes these figures from literature further, because he had taken the name of Oberon, obviously, from the fairy king in Shakespeare. Interesting for the case also of Verdeutschung is the title. So ein Sankt Johannes Nachtstraum instead of Midsummer Night Dream. So the foreignizing translation would have been Midsummer, but that wasn't really a concept, while Sankt Johannes Nacht was also in German folklore and superstition connected to a night when magic things can happen. You have it, for example, if any of you have ever listened to Die Meistersinger by Wagner, that is also set in the Johanni Nacht, the winning song by Stolzing starts with a song in honor of John the Baptist. Zettel, for example, is his version of bottom. He doesn't translate it directly as Hintern, or he doesn't keep modern German translators who tend to be much more foreignizing would probably just keep the name. Names are preserved. So if you read a Harry Potter translation, all of the characters except for Hermione, who is called Hermine because Hermione is just too long for German, keep their name. While if you read a Italian translation of Harry Potter, you will have Professore Serpente instead of Professor Snape. So the later development was here. Wieland tries to find an evocative German term for bottom, and Zettel can also be used for loo roll, or not roll, but if you just use a piece of paper to wipe your bottom. So I think that is probably, and Zettel also has the double T in the middle, like bottom, so he goes for something that is evocative rather than literal or foreignizing. So I'll just read you a little bit of his translation so that you hear his cadenzas and how he tries to replicate the poetic passages with poetic German language and the prose passages with more. So, ein St. Johannes Nachtstraum. Die Königin der Feen, Zettel, aufwartende Feen und Oberon hinter ihnen. Titania. Komm, setze dich auf dieses Blumenbette, weil ich dir deine holden Wangen streichle, dein glattes, weiches Haupt mit Rosenkränze und deine schönen, langen Ohren küsse, mein süßes Herz. Zettel. Monsieur Spinnenweb, werter Monsieur, nehmt eure Waffen zur Hand und tötet mir eine rotgeschenkelte Hummel auf einem Distelkopf. He keeps the Monsieur, which is also in English as a French loan word. Translate cobweb as Spinnenweb, which is close enough, and keeps the meter of the thing. we look at, so St. Johannes Nachtstraum was the very first text he translated, and Hamlet the very last text. It's interesting to see that he is going for a more literal approach in the later texts. But still trying to make it understandable in German, but being able to rely at that point already at an audience that had grown accustomed to translations from English. You can really see how he develops his translation in dialogue with his audience at Weimar, because it's also the time in which then Goethe thinks about translation, and that there is actually a third way which is beyond that, and that is to fuse a perfect new literature out of elements of the source language and of the Zielsprache, the target language. Thank you. I meant then to end my very originally shorter introduction by a tribute to Eckermann, who, so the ancestor of Dr. Klaus Eckermann, who recorded many of the conversations with Goethe, die Gespräche mit Eckermann, and among that also Goethe's praise of Weltliteratur. So Shakespeare, Wieland Shakespeare is really at the start of this development in Weimar of something that is beyond Nationalliteratur. Nationalliteratur will jetzt nicht viel sagen. Die Epoche der Weltliteratur ist an der Zeit und jeder muss jetzt dazu wirken, diese Epoche zu beschleunigen. So, rather than handing now over to Dr. Eckermann, we'll jump to Oxford in the 20th century and Ernst Stadler. And it's not that far away in that German expressionism in many respects plays on another epoch of German literature, namely Sturm und Drang, which is the background period for Wieland's Shakespeare translation, and the reason why Shakespeare appealed so much because of this untamed quality, the not rigidly like Molière or Racine 5-act drama structure, but something that was freer, more experimental. And this same experimental approach you can see in the group of poets forming in the first decade of the 20th century. So Stadler came from Strasbourg, the Alsace, and there was a whole group which called themselves das junge Elsass, who wanted to renew German literature in a similar way to the Sturm und Drang, renewing it also out of the spirit of connecting with other literatures, a new Weltliteratur to revive stale German texts. Also looking at the Middle Ages as inspiration, as I said, his dissertation was on Wolfram's Parzival, but then he became interested in Shakespeare, and since the German school system still favored classical languages over modern languages, so same way in which in Bavaria, in the secondary school where I was, I learned English pretty much just through translating Jane Austen after having learned classical Latin and classical Greek, very much as an afterthought. So he also thought it would be best to get another insight into English at the source. So he applied to a scholarship scheme, the Rhodes Scholars, which still exist, no longer for Germans, but Cecil Rhodes had recognized in the Germans a kindred Germanic spirit, so he had included them along Americans and Australians and New Zealanders into the scholarship scheme to come to Oxford. So he arrived in Oxford ready to embark on his habilitation, so the second doctorate that you have to do in Germany in order to be able to apply for a professorship. But Oxford at that time wasn't prepared for graduate students. They only had the tutorial system that you are still experiencing. So he was forced, if he wanted to be at Magdalen, to hand in a weekly essay to somebody who had no clue of the topics Stadler was researching. And he was nearly thrown out of college because he didn't hand in the format that was expected of him, because he was busy reading the proofs for his new Wieland edition, while he was supposed to write on the Nibelungenlied, which he had already done before his doctorate. Anyway, so to his rescue came Hermann Fiedler, who was the professor of German at that time here based at the Tellurian, and the small group of Oxford academics that were not college-based but faculty-based. So he held the Taylor Chair, which now Karen Lieder holds. Later than the medieval chair, which I now hold, was created. And these two positions are not tutorial fellowships, but outside this kind of system. And so for Stadler, the Tellurian became his home while he was working on the habilitation and then on his edition of Wieland's text. And if any of the second years are thinking about perhaps finding a nice dissertation topic, the papers of Hermann Fiedler still wait to be fully perused for literary scholarship, and there is a lot of the letters of support that Fiedler wrote negotiating with Magdalen about allowing Stadler to hand in literary text he thought fit rather than what the tutorial system required him to do. But I'd say you can also see the influence on Shakespeare on Stadler's poetry. So, Sonnenwendabend, another term for Midsummer Night, now with a kind of Germanic twist to it, more pagan sounding than the St. Johannes Nacht, and turned into a kind of fever dream of its own making. Die Sträucher ducken fiebernd sich zusammen in Rieseln brauner Schleier und im Schwanken nachtbleicher Falter um erglühte Ranken. Nun schüren wir das Fallbelaub zu Flammen und feiern wiegend in verlorenen Tänzen und Liedern, die im lauen Duft verfluten, den flüchtigen Rausch der sommerlichen Gluten und Mädchen weich das Haar genetzt mit Kränzen und strahlend bleich im schwebenden Gefunkel streuen brennend dunklen Mohn und blasse Nelken. Und bebend fühlen wir den Abend welken und wilder glühen die Feuer in das Dunkel. I thought I should, I have one final thought then, but the Stadler part with a look at his theoretical reflections about Entstehung und Wesen der Übersetzung, which he wrote for an essay collection round Wieland. Übersetzungen poetischer Werke haben stets nur einen bedingten und zeitlichen Wert. Die Unmöglichkeit zugestanden, die eigentümliche und einzigartige Gestalt eines dichterischen Gebildes durch die Mittel einer anderen Sprache in wirklich adäquater Weise auszudrücken. Und jeder wird sie zugestehen, der einmal die künstlerische Schöpfung als ein organisches und notwendiges Ganzes erkennen gelernt und erfahren hat, wie schwankend schon der Sinn der Worte, wie andersartig die durch sie ausgelösten Vorstellungen von einer Sprache zur anderen sind. Dieses zugestanden bleibt auch darüber hinaus noch den besten und gerade den besten Übersetzungen so viel persönlich und zeitlich Bedingtes anhaften, dass ihre Geltung immer nur so lange dauern kann, bis eine folgende Generation neue Schönheiten in dem Original entdeckt und neue Ausdrucksformen findet, sie nachzuschaffen. Schlegel's so this is the Schlegel who then also translated Shakespeare, von der ins Unendliche hin nur durch Annäherung zu lösenden Aufgabe des Übersetzers und Wielands Ausspruch, dass 9 leidliche Übersetzer, von denen immer der Jüngste just gut genug geschienen hat, dem 10. noch viel zu tun übrig lassen, haben nur die fortschreitende technische Vollendung der Übersetzung im Sinn, wie etwa Wetz mit Recht bemerkt hat, dass uns seit Kleist reichere und wirksamere Mittel zur Wiedergabe von Shakespeare dramatischem Vers zu Gebote stehen, als sie noch Schlegel besaß, der Shakespeares bewegten Dialog durch die lyrische Kunstsprache der Iphigenie auszudrücken versuchte. Aber auch die vollkommenste Übersetzung ist an die Geschmacks- und Gefühlsbedingungen ihrer Zeit gebunden und wird wertlos in dem Augenblick, wo diese Bedingungen hinfällig werden. Je rascher und durchgreifender sich bei der folgenden Generation der Umschwung in der Stellung zum Original vollzieht, umso rascher muss die Übersetzung im Preis fallen. So this is reflecting on that while there can only ever be one original, a translation is by definition something that is a process that has to be repeated, that is always temporary. And to show that as a very last example, a project that we did in 2016 for I'm always better with numbers, it was some Shakespeare anniversary. Anybody know what? Death, which? Yeah. So how many? 400. Yeah, 400 deaths of Shakespeare. and Ulrike Dresner had done a deliberately not just foreignized, twisting translation in the context of the cloning debate. So she had taken all the sonnets that talk about reproduction and had read them as if written for a 21st century reproduction cloning debate. And then Tom Cheeseman, another Oxford colleague, had back-translated these sonnets, again deliberately twisting them for an English audience into English. So we edited it as a 4-part version where you then end up comparing an English text of the 17th century with an English text of the 21st century, gone through 2 translation cycles that show how an extreme case of the Zeitverhaftetheit, that you translate always for a specific audience with a specific background. All right, so I've spun out my introduction and the coda to nearly an hour. Next week, we are jumping even further forward into the extreme, not always pleasant present tense of German, but with a look back, not perhaps in anger, at earlier phases of the German language that have enabled the AfD to use these slogans. So looking at the long shadow that totalitarian language casts, mainly from looking at comparison with National Socialism language, but also previous how things like Reformation polemics, discussions like language purism have paved a way for disparaging language. And I'm very pleased and grateful that Nadine has come today, who will be speaking in week 4, and taking us back to perhaps happier places. I'm not sure.
I'm not sure, right? I don't know.
No, not happier places, the Baroque either.
People in public weeks having arguments.
Okay, yeah. So at least it won't be boring. I can promise you. So see you next week for Henk de Berg. Thank you.